told your friend you're not okay.
There are stories that were never meant to be news. There are truths that were never meant to be public. And today, HYBE finally broke their longest silence, and that silence involved Jungkook. The narrative begins with something simple yet shocking. HYBE, an agency known for years for its meticulous strategies and near-perfect calculations, finally admitted the existence of a secret project. But it wasn't a project designed for the market, not a major surprise that usually triggers global trends, but something far more personal. For the first time, they were opening up a glimpse of something they had always protected, not as an asset, but as a human being. Behind every strategy, HYBE always prioritized one skill: silence. Not an empty silence, but a charged silence, a silence that only occurs when something is being built behind the scenes, something the noise of the industry shouldn't touch. In a time when the entertainment world moves fast, when everyone is chasing momentum in a matter of seconds, HYBE chose not to run. They let time pass at its own pace. There was no forced acceleration, no dramatic push. But precisely because of that, armies are wondering, what are they really hiding? What makes this silence feel so heavy, as if there's something bigger than a mere business plan? When HYBE finally admitted, yes, there's a project we've been keeping under wraps for years, they added something that changed everything. The project wasn't created to shock the market. It was created to protect Jungkook. A name too big for one person to handle, too often burdened with the expectations of billions, and too rarely given the space to simply pause. Years before the world knew him as Jungkook of BTS, he was just a teenager coming to Seoul with a dream he didn't even know could be this big. The world pulled him in so fast, giving him no respite, no room to breathe. And HYBE saw it all. They saw how Jungkook worked without complaint, how he always chose to persevere rather than ask, "Why me?" And that's where the seeds of this project emerged, a project that wasn't just a strategy, but a decision to protect someone from a burden he never chose. At the height of BTS's success, when the industry logic was clear: speed things up, increase exposure, increase endorsements, maximize the global market, HYBE held back. Not because they doubted Jungkook's abilities. Rather, they believed in him too deeply. They knew, if the world pushed him too hard prematurely, his career might soar, but he would slowly crumble. And that was a price they would never pay. This project wasn't conceived in a large meeting room, not the result of a lengthy proposal or a viral target. It was born in a small space, a quiet space where Jungkook was finally taught to ask himself, who am I when there are no cameras? Who am I when there are no demands? Who am I if I stop being what the world wants me to be? In that space, Jungkook learned for the first time that being strong doesn't mean enduring all the pain. That rest isn't a sin. That silence isn't weakness, but rather a healing process. There was one phase the public never knew about, the point when the project was almost cancelled. Not because the idea was bad, not because the impact was small, but because HYBE saw something the world didn't. They saw the burden Jungkook held behind his smile, behind his overly long pauses in his breathing, behind his answers that sounded perfect but hid his exhaustion. And in that moment, they chose to step back. Not to give up, not to delay success, but to protect the man behind that overly big name. Interestingly, armies unwittingly witnessed the most silent transformation in Jungkook's career. They saw the way he spoke change, slower, more meaningful. They saw how he no longer rushed his answers, how his smile seemed freer, not forced by global demands. It wasn't a rebranding. It wasn't a concept. It was Jungkook finally finding himself without having to lose anyone. An army? They stayed. Without pushing. Without asking for proof. Without demanding a schedule. They understood that sometimes love isn't about asking, but accompanying someone to find their way back. When HYBE finally spoke, there was no countdown. No dramatic teaser. No promise of a big reveal. Just one sentence that silenced the entire industry: this project will be introduced when Jungkook is ready. Not when the market is ready. Not when the media is ready. And it turns out, by the time the world began to realize that something was being secretly built, the project itself was already nearing completion. Not completion as a product, but completion as a process, a long journey not designed for the market, but for the perfection of a person who had long been deprived of breathing space. After years of being held back, guarded, and hidden, the project had finally reached a point where a decision had to be made, whether or not to let the world see it. HYBE knew that once this door was opened, there would be no turning back. The world would scrutinize every detail, analyze every step, transforming a personal process into global consumption. That's why they were cautious right up to the last second. But the key was the small changes in Jungkook, changes that might not be obvious, but were felt by anyone who paid attention with their hearts, not their eyes. The way he sat more calmly. The way he laughed a little more sincerely. The way he spoke, less rushed, as if he were being chased by the world's expectations. These were all signs that the process, built over years, was beginning to work. He wasn't preparing to become someone new. He was learning to accept himself without having to become the perfectionist the public wanted him to be. That change, without realizing it, became the biggest catalyst for why the secret project was finally ready to be revealed. Because what the world was about to see wasn't a concept, a work of art, or a strategy. What it was about to show was someone who had finally recovered. Someone who had rediscovered themselves. And when the news began to leak to ARMY, their reaction was very different from what is typical in the entertainment industry. There was no panic. No demands for speed. No excessive speculation. Instead, something rare in a fandom this size emerged: calm. It was as if they all knew that whatever happened, what mattered wasn't the scale of the project, but whether Jungkook was truly ready to embrace it. HYBE themselves were surprised by how mature the public's reaction was. For the first time in years, they weren't under pressure to release, promote, or explain. They saw that the world, at least the part of the world that loved Jungkook, was beginning to understand what they had been protecting from the start: a human being, not an icon. And behind that public silence, Jungkook took his first step. A small, but meaningful step. A step that showed he was no longer walking with the same burden he had so many years ago. Now he walks with a slightly lighter heart, a slightly more stable mind, and a gradually regained courage. HYBE looks at the journey with relief. Because they know this project would never have succeeded if forced. No matter how much money was at stake. No matter how high the global expectations. No matter how quickly the world demanded it. The only thing that mattered was Jungkook's readiness. And the day he finally nodded his head, signaling his readiness for the next stage, HYBE's entire priority shifted. No longer asking when the market was ready, but how to keep Jungkook safe. No longer asking what would go viral, but what would keep him intact. Now, the project that had lived in a closed room was taking shape. Not as a concept, but as a story of a healing journey. As proof that this harsh industry still had room to protect someone who had given so much to the world. And when the world finally saw what had truly been built over all those years, they would realize that this project wasn't the greatest gift to Jungkook's career, it was the greatest gift to his life. Something that can't be bought, can't be planned with numbers, can't be promoted with expensive concepts, the opportunity to be yourself without fear of losing anyone's love. This story isn't over. In fact, this is where it all begins. Because now, for the first time since his debut, Jungkook is stepping out into the world not as someone shaped by expectations, but as someone finding his own path. And Top K-pop will continue to be here, following his every step, not to monitor, but to celebrate the journey of someone who finally dared to live on his own terms.